Getting older is terrible, right?
It's beautiful.
So I had two grandfathers, right? One was from the old country, as they say. And my one grandfather, who was getting older, was once teetering for a second. I had to catch him to help him catch his balance. He looked at me and he says, never get old, right? So I told my other grandfather what he said. Zeta, that's grandfather in Yiddish. I said, Zeta, my grandpa told me, never get old. He said, what, he wants you should die? Like, in other words, that beats the alternative, man. I'm not ashamed of being 48 or 78 or whatever you are, man. It beats the alternative.
Max, that sounds good until you got to get up in the morning after you played 11 years in the National Football League.
Well,
that's called first-class problems, though, bro.
Yeah, like with the owners, that's your problem.
I hear what you're saying, but it
still hurts. It feels real bad. I'm with you.
Exactly.
It doesn't make it hurt less.
Exactly.
So Keyshawn, J. Will, and Max is presented by Progressive Insurance. The voice you're hearing that's not Key is Chris Canty sitting in for Key today. So, guys, this is what Jim Irsay told The Athletic about Carson Wentz this offseason, right? Ready for this one? I wish Carson well. Wait till you hear the rest of this, lies. Okay, ready for this? I think he has a chance to go into a different environment and play great in Washington. You really believe that, Jim? He told The Athletic this at the owners' meeting on Tuesday, obviously. It's just for us, it was something we had to move away from as a franchise. It was very obvious. Now, listen to what he goes on to say, all right? You tell me if you believe he thinks he's going to do well in Washington, Carson Wentz. Jacksonville clearly wasn't an accident. Talking about Urban Meyer now, right? You search for the right chemistry with any team. Football is as important as any sport there is, meaning chemistry in football. I think it's probably more important. If that chemistry is off, if it isn't there, it can be extremely detrimental and lower performance to agree that is stunning, and shocking. We had to move away from him as a franchise. It was obvious. And here's the thing, guys. Frank Reich stuck his neck out for Carson Wentz. They traded a lot to go get him. And he was supposed to be the dude who believed in Wentz more than anyone else 1 year later, after Wentz was top 10 in QBR, right? But he saw how he folded down the stretch. And, Chris, there had to be other things going on for Frank Reich to be like, we're good.
No, you're right, Max. And I think the part that you're reading about Jacksonville, you may be misinterpreting because you're taking that to mean Urban Meyer and that dumpster fire that was the Jags for the majority of the season. I think that's about the Colts' performance against the Jaguars.
That's my fault. You're right.
Had
You're right.
4.3 QBR and had multiple turnovers.
Pardon me. You're absolutely right. Since I read that quote, I had it in my mind. Yeah, Urban Meyer, it was toxic. You need to, but 100% right. That's one of those
How do you, Max, how do you lose to Jacksonville in a win and in situation? All the Colts had to do was win that game. Yeah. All they had to do was win a home game against the Raiders. How do you lose both of those games? You bring Carson Wentz in because you think he's going to be an upgrade from Phillip Rivers in order to make the difference in those handful of plays, those handful of throws throughout the game in order to put your team in position to be in the playoffs.
Jay, it's so interesting to me the way I interpreted that because it seems obvious. Like, what, are you, an idiot, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe the answer is yes. But when I read that thing, my mind immediately goes to Wentz's influence on the locker room. And when I read the Jacksonville thing, I thought, ooh, bad locker room, bad situation. You got to get the toxicity out of there. Well, but in fact, it shows up on the field in Jacksonville.
Well, it is a bad influence in the locker room when you lose games the way he lost that game. Yeah. I mean, by the way, Jim Irsay told you what time it was, January 25th, with the late night tweet. Don't you guys remember that late night tweet?
Yeah,
you need a QB in the offense who can score 30 or more to win in today's game. You can see that clearly when the final 8 NFL playoff teams, you need a QB in offense. Like that's what every team had in the final 8 of the NFL playoffs. So for me, I never thought Carson Wentz was it. And let's move the ball down the field. Now I look at Ron Rivera and I look at the Commanders and I say, so was that by default? That you got Carson Wentz? Was he just a placeholder? Because there's a part of me that looks at Taylor Heinicke, and I'm thinking, man, I kind of like what I see from Taylor Heinicke more so than what I see from Carson Wentz. That's me personally. Now, I know Dan Orlovsky, others may argue that, but I see the influence in how Taylor Heinicke fights for it, and I see the way other people don't respond to Carson Wentz.
Chris,
that makes me worried about his leadership.
100%, Jay, but I think I kind of like Heinicke. He's athletic.
Me too.
Yeah.
But
he's a fire to him.
And scrappy. Yeah. I think that what it comes down to, I've heard Rivera talk about this a little bit. When when you really need something, right, you squint to see what you want to see, right? Like it's hard. The saying goes, it's hard to explain something to someone whose job depends on them not understanding it, right? Mm-hmm. And the reverse of that is, or a corollary at least, is like when you really need something, you can sometimes invent it for yourself. You can imagine that it's a mirage, right? But you think it's real. And I think when they sit down, a quarterback-needy team starts to look at tape of Carson Wentz, you're not going to look at the worst moment he ever had. You're just going to review tape. And when you do, you see he's big, he's mobile, he has a big arm, he can make the throws, he can read a defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's how these teams, to me, are talking themselves into this guy. Because if you step back and see the big picture, sober, without the goggles on, how could you want him to be your quarterback?
I don't know, Max. And here's the thing that I can't get past. When you see some of the gaffes from Carson Wentz, like some of the lowest of the lows throughout the course of the NFL season, I'm talking about that game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but I'm also talking about that game against the Tennessee Titans when he has the turnover in the shadow of his own goal line in overtime. He throws the pick to Kevin Byard. Those types of things can't happen in order for your team to win at the highest levels. You got to remember, this team 2 years ago under Phillip Rivers, who was a quarterback that was mediocre at best, I think he finished 17th in QBR that season, they came a goal-to-goal sequence away from beating the Buffalo Bills in Orchard Park in the playoffs. And now you add Carson Wentz.
Phillip Rivers passed away 2 years before that game started.
You add Carson Wentz to this team, and all of a sudden, you're talking about the same core guys not being able to get back into the dance. So you have to understand that part of it. And then you also look at what happened with Carson Wentz a couple of years ago in Philly. Jay, I mean, listen, you're talking about a guy that led the NFL in interceptions and only played in 12 games. Mm-hmm. He only played in 12 games. He gave way to Jalen Hurts at the end of it because they realized, you know what, this dude ain't it. But beyond the lack of production on the field, and as bad as it looks at times with Carson Wentz, the grumblings, the reports about how he relates to his teammates in the locker room is something that can't ignore. And now you're going to parachute this dude into a situation where you know the Washington Commanders have some issues in that locker room. Look no further than what happened late in the season against the Dallas Cowboys when Daron Payne sucker punched Jonathan Allen on the sideline. Carson Wentz is supposed to go into that situation and lead those dudes?
Started way before that. They were dead in the water when Nick Foles took over after the Super Bowl, brought him to the playoffs. They weren't responding to Wentz. Wentz was even bad the half year before that, the second half when everyone's saying, oh, he's MVP, they're going to the playoffs. He was bad down the stretch. He was beating terrible teams and turning the ball over. They got lucky. What is our confidence that Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan can lead their new team to the playoffs? That's in 20 minutes. But coming up, one rules change that led to one of the great reunions of last week. That's next. Keyshawn.